picture this. You're walking through the financial district of San Francisco. You're surrounded by these gleaming, high-tech skyscrapers. I mean, this is some of the most expensive real estate on the entire planet. But what if I told you there's a wild secret hiding just beneath all that concrete and glass?
Seriously, imagine you could just take a jackhammer to the sidewalk there, on, say, Clay Street or Battery Street. If you were to dig down about 20 feet, you wouldn't just hit dirt or pipes. You'd hit something else entirely, something big and made of wood.
Yep, you heard that right. You would literally hit the deck of a ship. Buried right under the feet of all those bankers and tourists is a massive, rotting ghost fleet. We are talking hundreds of wooden vessels, whaling ships, cargo ships, you name it, all from the 19th century, just entombed in the mud. They are the literal foundation of the modern city. So how in the world did they get there? Well, it's an absolutely insane story of chaos, greed, and some pretty clever thinking. To really get this, you first have to understand the sheer madness that was the California Gold Rush. It was a moment in time when a tiny, forgotten village basically exploded into a metropolis so fast that it literally ran out of solid ground to stand on.
See, before all the gold, San Francisco wasn't even called San Francisco. It was this sleepy little Mexican outpost called Yerba Buena, home to maybe 800 people. It was quiet, it was foggy, and let's be honest, it was a place nobody in the world really cared about. And then on January 24th, 1848, a carpenter sees something shiny in a river. Gold. Now, news traveled slowly back then, but once word got out, it triggered an absolute explosion. The population skyrocketed from just 800 people to over 25,000 in a couple of years. The entire world just went crazy for California gold.
So how did all those people get there? Well, there were no transcontinental trains yet, so most of them had to come by boat. And get this, in 1849 alone, a staggering 40,000 people arrived in San Francisco by sea. The tiny village was completely swamped. We're talking no hotels, no bathrooms, no real streets, just mud, tents, and a massive crisis brewing right there in the harbor.
And this created a really strange problem. Gold fever was contagious. As soon as a ship would arrive, its crew would take one look at those hills where everyone was saying there was gold, and they'd just walk right off the job. Sailors deserted in droves. Eventually, even the captains gave up and followed them, just abandoning their ships. So the result was, well, just picture it. A harbor choked with hundreds of perfectly good, expensive ships just floating there, totally abandoned. People at the time called it the Forest of Masts because you could barely even see the water. These ships started to rot, swinging on their anchor chains, crashing into each other. The whole harbor became this dangerous, tangled mess of ghost ships.
City officials had no idea what to do with this mess. But a few clever and, yeah, pretty greedy businessmen looked at that rotting fleet and saw an opportunity. The city was booming, and it desperately needed two things: buildings and land. They realized the ghost ships could give them both.
Real estate was already becoming impossibly expensive, so the city government did something, well, kind of shady. They started selling what they called water lots. They literally drew a grid on a map right over the shallow parts of the bay and sold those squares of water to investors. The sales pitch was basically, here's your plot of land. Oh, by the way, it's currently underwater, but, good luck with that. So if you were one of these entrepreneurs who just bought a square of water and there's a free, abandoned ship floating nearby, you'd do the math. The process was brilliant. You'd go claim a ghost ship, tow it over to your water lot, and then intentionally sink it into the mud until it was good and stable. Then you could just cut a door in the side, build on top, and fill in all the land around it. Boom. Instant real estate. Now, the most famous example of this was a ship called the Niantic. It was a whaling ship, and its crew, like so many others, ran for the hills in 1849. The new owners dragged the ship and grounded it at the corner of what we now know as Clay and Sandome streets. They built a 2-story hotel right on top of the deck, and the massive hall underneath became a warehouse. You could literally book a room and sleep in a ship that was now a building. How cool is that? And this wild resourcefulness wasn't just limited to the Niantic. Oh no. The brig Euphemia was bought by the city and turned into its first jail and insane asylum. I mean, can you imagine being a prisoner locked in the dark, damp hull of a sunken ship? The Apollo was converted into a saloon, and countless other ships became warehouses, offices, and even people's homes. So you're probably wondering how these ships ended up so far from the water today. Well, they didn't move. The city grew over them. If you look at the original 1849 shoreline, you see this wide bay. But as the city expanded, that bay was just filled in with sand from the dunes and, frankly, whatever trash was lying around. The ships were simply buried as new land was created, block by block.
This frantic landfill process basically sealed the ships into the city's foundation, almost like artifacts in a time capsule. But their story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Ghost Fleet left a legacy of fire and rediscovery that continues right up to this day.
So there was one major problem with building a city out of old wooden ships, canvas tents, and flimsy shacks. It was incredibly flammable. Between 1849 and 1851, the city burned to the ground 6 separate times. The Great Fire of May 1851 was especially brutal, wiping out the whole new business district.
But here's the thing about gold rush greed. It's incredibly impatient. Developers didn't bother to dig out all the burnt wreckage of these shipbuildings. No time for that. They just smoothed over the ashes and built new, permanent stone buildings right on top of the charred skeletons, perfectly preserving their remains in the mud for over a century.
So let's fast forward to the modern era. Every single time a new skyscraper foundation is dug or a subway tunnel is bored, construction crews risk hitting something unexpected. For instance, in 1978, the remains of the Niantic were found near the Transamerica Pyramid. And in 2001, when workers found another ship, the General Harrison, they couldn't even remove it, so they just poured the building's concrete foundation right around the ship's hull. It's still there. And that's just a staggering thought, isn't it? It means that right now there are people in downtown San Francisco sitting at their desks, typing on their computers, completely unaware that just a few feet below them lies the massive wooden hull of a ship that sailed around Cape Horn during the gold rush. You know, San Francisco has always been a city of reinvention. And it just seems so fitting that the city itself is built on a foundation of abandonment, that the very ships that brought all the dreamers were sacrificed to build the land they dreamed on. So the next time you visit, remember what's right there beneath your feet. You aren't just walking on a sidewalk. You are walking on the deck of the ghost fleet that never left. And that brings me to one last question for you to think about. If you were a ship's captain back in 1849, watching your entire crew just disappear into the hills, what would you have done? Would you have honored your duty and stayed with your ship? Or would you have abandoned it all and run for the gold? Be honest.